reject entirely the foundation of the belief system, however, of any ableistic piece of shit who thinks that because they know of autistic people who have lived their lives in ways different than my life and my set circumstances and my setbacks. All I have to say about this is that just because other autistic people have done what I haven't doesn't mean jack diddly shit. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one of us. So get wrecked and take your ableism to somebody who gives a fuck about your feelings. It does not matter what other autistic people have managed to achieve. We're all individuals. Eat shit and get the fuck out of my life. I mean, like, I don't have time for that nonsense, and it's all just ableism, nothing more. I am tired, ultimately, of the can do, accept no excuses mentality, especially here on YouTube, where it's just like, if you haven't achieved anything, it's entirely your fault. You can do anything. I like it's this boundless American optimism that is just out of step with reality. Yes, optimism is a good thing, but American optimism ventures into delusional territory. And and I would say that delusional optimism, it's never a good thing to be deluded. It's always a bad thing to have delusions. Always. So delusional optimism can't be a good thing. It's always a bad thing to be delusional. So, America's delusional optimism manifested many problems for our society. It creates a lot of problems that you might not be considering, which is, because of the fact that we think of ourselves as basically fundamentally temporarily embarrassed millionaires. We're not allowing ourselves to basically embrace certain modes of thinking and certain schools of thought and certain, ideologies, because we don't see ourselves as exploited proletariat. We see ourselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires who are going to be rich someday. But maybe, but the truth is, most of us are never going to be rich. We've just been nurtured by a fucking culture that fucking sold us on a bunch of rags to riches tales our whole entire lives. We've been lied to systematically by pretty much every institution and establishment that has ever tried to sell us much of anything. I hate to break it to you, but you've been lied to. You know, most of us are not going to be rock stars. Most of us are not going to be rich. We're not going to be, you know, to fly that high ultimately. And that some rags to riches tales exist is not a relevant fact, because what matters are not, examples and anecdotal stories. Do you know what an antidote is, by the way? In case my audience is not aware of what an antidote is, anecdotal evidence, the weakness of one. So, anecdotal evidence is basically a factual claim relying on personal observation collected on a non-systematic manner. The term is sometimes used in legal context to describe certain types of testimony which are uncorroborated by objective or independent evidence, as notarized documentation, photograph, audio, video recordings, etc. So basically, an anecdote is a self-contained story, you know. And when it comes to the American dream, in order to sell the American dream to most of us, what they had to do was to give us a bunch of anecdotal examples of rags to riches stories. Those stories, however, in their sum total, don't mean jack fucking shit. What matters is not these individual stories. What matters is what the general trend indicates about the American dream. And what the general trend is that most American dream is dead. It's dead and barely existed to begin with. The general trend is, not good for it. You know, to the extent that it ever existed or was real, it's been a bunch of crap. When someone references the American dream, one is often reminded of something they were taught in elementary school. When learning about immigration in third grade, we were taught that people were immigrating to the United States to chase the American dream. The image put in our head was a husband and wife living in a small, simple house in the suburbs with 2 to 3 children and perhaps a dog. These houses came with green, lush, well-manicured lawns, white picket fences. The image included the idea of a mother being a housewife, the father, the breadwinner, per se, worked a job and paid well enough to allow him to be the only one that needed to work. In the theater department, we read plays of different genres, many different styles, and from many different countries, from ancient Greece to medieval France, all the way up to recent productions on and off Broadway. I have read many plays thus far in my college career. My junior seminar focused on the American dream and American playwrights. These included people like such as Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, Lorraine Hansberry. Most of all the American dramas deal with the idea of the American dream. Given this, my own experience living in the United States for 21 years, I can confidently say that the American dream is a dead, outdated concept that barely existed in the first place and was created to keep Americans hungry, happy about working for money-hungry corporations. The first issue I have with the American dream still being used as a viable term is that it's not the same for black, indigenous people of color as it is for white people, both historically and in today's world. The modern definition of the American dream was born in the 1950s during the rise of a post-war consumerism. As women returned from being housewives from their work-time factory jobs, advertisements for household appliances quickly changed their targets to the idealized post-war American family. In this image, we have the hardworking man who earns all the money the house needs, the housewife who has all the best appliances she needs to be the perfect spouse, and the children that play sports and need to eat picture-perfect meals every day of their lives. What this image does not have and did not ever have was a BIPOC family in the same scenario. That is because the American dream sets an inherently racist expectation that one focuses on the perfect white family that BIPOC should be assimilate to. It effectively disregards the existence and therefore importance of families of color. One could argue that the reason this was never depicted was because BIPOC families did not live that way, and they would be correct. Families of color did not live idyllic lives due to systematic racial inequality that faced throughout history. The American dream has been a privilege extended has never been a privilege extended to persons of color, and then it's certainly seen as in the post-war consumerism as well as modern America. The main reason the American dream is dead for all Americans, regardless of race, is due to wealth inequality in the United States today. As the world has become more evolved, more jobs require education further than high school. Much to the working class's disadvantage, the cost of higher education has disproportionately risen in comparison to the income of average Americans. This makes college education much harder to achieve for people from lower income families. One must also consider that what it currently means to be a middle class family in America, with a general range of the middle class status between 45,000 and 130,000, and the median American income being approximately $30,000. It's clear that most families who manage to fall into the middle or lower classes are closer to the poverty line than they are to achieving the upper middle class status, approximately 140,000 to 150,000. Furthermore, the generational gap between then and now is exceptionally wide. It was perfectly valuable for a person just out of high school to pay for their college education by flipping burgers for $4 an hour. That is not the case today. Inflation has risen at an alarming rate, where the national minimum wage has not. In Pennsylvania, the minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. In Crawford County, this is the standard most jobs will start you at. And although some will bump you up to $7.75 per hour if you have previous experience, but for a young person who has never worked before, the prospects are grim for the amount of money that they will be able to make in a single summer. I am thankful to have one of the few well-paying hourly summer jobs in Crawford County. I started at age 50. Given my experience for working with minimum wage the previous summer at the farm market, that I now make $10 per hour. Each paycheck I made around $450. This person's story, not mine. After working approximately 12 weeks, June through August, I made around $3,000 from the summer. My monthly bills came to approximately $75. Already one third through the summer income Already one third through total summer income. Already one third of my total summer income is going to be spent on bills. The remaining $2,000 is less than 1/10 the cost of tuition loaded a single semester at Algernon College, and for comparison, approximately over 1/10 of the average yearly cost of attending Edinburgh University. Unfortunately, my summer employment situation seems to be unique compared to the majority of students on campus. It's absolutely no longer possible to pay for a college education with a summer job alone, and the American dream only perpetuates the idea that it is. The same applies to the millennial housing crisis. The cost of owning a home is almost 40% higher than it was in 1980, which is around the time that the later boomers were finishing college. We can no longer afford to live the lives our parents did, or their parents led during the birth of the American dream. On the same level, the American dream is commonly used by today's older folks to berate and belittle millennials for their financial instability. The idea that a person who works a job 40 hours a week with benefits can be totally financially unstable is a fallacy that we need to stop perpetuating. It is by no means possible for every American because of racial inequality, gender inequality, and a lot of other things that cause people to be stripped of any chance at the, quote, American dream. In countless plays I have read since coming to college, families are torn apart by the, quote, American dream. Some struggle to find housing, some struggle to find identity, others struggle to find employment. The worst part of these plays is that these plays primarily take place in the mid 20th the mid to late 20th century between 1950 and 1999. The American dream has never been real for most Americans, and instead has served as an unachievable standard for generations for people of all backgrounds. It is a concept that I fucking despise in attaining its unrealistic ideal as if proof of their superiority. If the goal was the promotion of consumerism and capitalism as a societal norm, its goal was the promotion of consumerism and capitalism as a societal norm, and sadly, it has reached past this goal and will seep into our lives half a century after. You know, it is. It was never really all that alive in the first place. The general trend was mostly people, who grew up in poverty, stayed in poverty all the way until their deaths. They could work for a company and have complete loyalty to that company for 80 years only to retire in poverty. That was the truth, and that was what happened to the most people. So we were raised and enculturated to read anecdotal examples of the people who did succeed, and then generalize those anecdotes as if they spoke about the truth of the American dream. If you have a rags to riches tale yourself, you're an example of rags to riches privilege, or you are pointing to a rags to riches tale that has inspired you, it is not relevant. Most of us will never be rich.